Hello everyone, this is Brittany O'Neill, your Humanities and Social Sciences librarian. You may remember I came to class a few weeks ago and we did an activity on finding articles for your group projects and evaluating some of the content, and there were still a few struggles with particularly identifying relevant scholarly articles and figuring out what each of the components were in those articles, which is completely understandable. A lot of you probably have not dealt with academic scholarly resources before, and especially not ones that tend to be of a more clinical nature and maybe a little bit more technical. So what I'm going to do today is go through how to develop that search strategy, how to identify a good article for my topic, and go through that article and pick apart some of the pieces. So we're starting here on your COMD 2081 Research Strategies Guide. I'm here on the Library Resources for Research tab, and like we did in the last class, I'm going to start with Academic Search Complete. So here we are on our database, and let's say I want to focus on a topic having to do with stereotypes and perception and language disorders in general. I want to go really broad. So let's just start out with maybe stereotype and language, just to see what we get. Obviously, too many results. I have over 1,000, and as we discussed in the last class, that's way too many. I can't handle that many results. And I'm also noticing that a lot of this has to do with language and languages and not so much with the ability of language or of speech. So maybe I want to get a little bit more specific. Maybe I want to look at stereotypes and speech perception and language disorders. So I'm getting really specific here. And we talked a little bit about some of the different words you could switch out, specifically with perception. So we might look at things like stereotypes and perception being connected, looking at views or attitudes as switch outs for perception. So just some strategies that you could take. I like these results better already. There's two. I could probably go a little bit broader, but for the purposes of this, I'm going to take a look at this first article. This is an academic journal, it says it on there, but let's actually evaluate it and see if the content is really what I'm looking for. So I can see the subject terms, it's talking about stereotypes, it's talking about language disorders, it's talking about perception. Those are all the things that I'm looking for. And here I can look at the abstract, and that abstract is going to give me a quick summary of whether or not this is something that I should be looking at. So I look here, I see that we're getting something about people rating speech samples of people with different communication disorders. I think this is probably going to look good. I see from the end something about discussing the need for public education in order to dispel stereotypes. I think this is going to be good. Obviously, I'm going to read the whole thing to get an idea. Go into this full text finder so we can read the whole article. Leads me to the Science Direct page. I've opened up the full text. I'm going to download the PDF just for the sake of ease of reading. Here we are at our full PDF view of our article. I've already skimmed through the abstract, so let's go ahead and go through some pieces of the article and see if we can identify what's important in this article. So we have in our introduction, that's giving me some background information as well as introducing me to the existing literature on the topic and hopefully presenting gaps where this research that they're about to present is going to fit in. So I see that this first paragraph talks about commonly formed simplified stereotypes of others. So they're talking about stereotypes of language in general to start as an introduction. The second paragraph, we're going into the previous research on perception and stereotypes having to do with language disorders. So we're presenting some of that past research. We see some research about listening to sound clips of individuals with and without such disorders. So that's a sign of some research that's being done and maybe an angle that we're going to go with. As I go down, we get another study here, and they're looking at stuttering and evaluating based on gender. But we're seeing gender effect was not duplicated in a later study, leaving open the question of whether listener gender impacts judgments. They're presenting a gap here that presumably they're going to try to fill. And then we go here, we've got some stuff about a different angle that they might look at. So we've got levels of exposure to stuttering, and I think that's going to be a key figure in their study. So again, this is all just giving an idea of what research has already been done and where this existing research is going to fit in. So here is where we fit in. They talk about the current study containing a similar methodology to the study that they discuss above, and then breaking down exactly what conditions they're going to look at and comparing them, and then also comparing other factors such as gender, age, personal contact with people with communication disorders, and the areas they live in. So that's the background information. That's how we're presenting where our research is going to fit in. So then we get into our methods, which is broken into a few different sections, but obviously the methods are going to tell me about how this study was conducted before we even get to what the results were. So we get participants were 450 students attending FAU. So that is our population that we're looking at. We have 450 adult students. This is 148 men, 296 women, 6 individuals of different genders. And then we see that there are only 445 participants that they're actually analyzing. So that is our sample size. Then we get into the procedure. So now that we've looked at what our population is, the procedure is going to tell us how they did the study with these people. So they say that they used speech samples, they were recorded, they're specifically using an actor who they are coaching to give characteristics of different conditions rather than having people who have the actual conditions, and then gave some different things to look out for that actor. They then selected a set number of clips, and then were given to participants one audio clip each. So they did not evaluate every single one. And then they rated their impressions of the voice based on different trait pairs. So that's our survey instrument. We have intelligence, self-esteem, decisiveness, reliability, emotional stability, social adjustment, relaxed versus stressed, employability, and ambitiousness. So those are the characteristics that people are evaluating. And then they are also listing those demographic information points that were listed in previous studies. So that is the background of how this is being done. There is obviously no treatment or intervention in this particular study because they're not working with a particular patient group with language disorders, right? So then we get into the results. So the results tell me the data of exactly what we're getting. So for here, we have for each of the trait pairs, analyses were performed across the disorder types. This is then further broken down. So we have our ratings for each disorder type in graph form, and there's some descriptions here. So something that I think is worth mentioning is that the ratings for people who have no disorder, or the actor portraying no speech language disorder, were more favorable than all other language conditions on most of these categories that they're looking at, which I think is really interesting. And that's their big finding, I think. Something else I'll highlight is that it's really important that you're not just looking at the graph, but also reading the description, because you can see on this one that a low score is actually more positive in this graph, and in previous graphs, a low score is more negative. So you have to pay a lot of attention to what we're looking at here. And we have significant differences across conditions were found for a good number of the personality traits that they were ascribing to the different disorders. So our big findings so far are that the reviewers found the no disorder sample as more favorable, and that there are differences among them for all of the different disorders. This is all of the raw data compared, and then they break it down for what the ratings were, the most important pieces for each of the different disorder categories that they picked. So I could go into these and pull important information about how different disorders are viewed. Important things that they were looking to study was to maybe debunk previous research, and the previous research had some things to say about interactions with people with communication disorders influencing people's perceptions or even their gender, and they found no significant difference. So that is also an interesting finding. Here we get into the discussion, and the discussion is going to tell me why any of this data is important, how it confirms or refutes previous research, as well as opening the door for what future research might look like. So this is where all of that's going to be. I'm not going to get too into the nitty-gritty. They found a lot of really interesting things. They list some of their limitations here, so some of the reasons why the data may look the way that it does and may not be able to be read completely clearly. So that's also something to look for, is that research is not 100% perfect, and so there are limitations that may influence the way that data turns out. So here, our discussion and our conclusion are lumped together in one section. So that's another thing to look out for, is that sometimes your introduction and your literature review are in one section, or they're separate, or your conclusion and your discussion are put together. Sometimes results sections and discussion sections are put together. There are some key phrases to look for, like a potential limitation usually shows up in a discussion section. We have the present study suggests, that would usually go in either discussion or results, just some things to look for. And then from here we have our appendices, and the appendices are just telling me what the survey instrument was and giving me exactly what it looks like. That's that transparency that we look for in original research. So I could actually go through and see what questions they were specifically asked. So I hope this gives you an idea of how better to digest the information that I'm looking at and evaluate whether or not something is relevant for my project. If you have any questions, you all have my contact information, or feel free to ask your instructor, but I hope that this helps you suss out what you're looking at a little bit better.